Welcome to our course on Sass, syntactically awesome style sheets. I'm your host, Brian Hoke. Glad you're aboard. And we're going to talk about not only how to use this CSS preprocessor, but I think more importantly, why. And not just where do I put a semicolon or how do variables work, but how do you use Sass to make your CSS development easier, more organized, more efficient, perhaps better working in teams or just better working on your own. So Sass takes Sass code and turns it into CSS. And along the way, we will take a site that looks like this with no styling, and little by little, we'll use a variety of different Sass techniques to turn it into a more styled page. Perhaps I'm not the most gifted of designers, but I do know a thing or two about Sass. And I know it certainly helped me in my work in crafting CSS code that is both more efficient in my authoring of it and my updating of it later, and in my users downloading it more efficiently. Along the way, we'll certainly spend a fair bit of time talking about how to install Sass, both through using applications or in the way in which we'll interact with Sass for the most part in this course from the command line. We'll talk about how, if you're using Windows, a PC, you'll probably need to install Ruby, the scripting language in which Sass is written. And if you're using a Mac, you probably already have Ruby installed. But in either case, we'll go through how one installs the Sass gem, the Ruby gem, on your PC or Mac machine. And we'll take a look at a variety of core aspects of Sass. We'll talk about variables and how using variables can simplify your life, make it easier for you to make changes quickly to a page or to a site, to come back later and tweak things. Sass variables are one of the great features of the language. We'll talk about nesting, how Sass, unlike traditional CSS, allows us to nest elements together inside of each other and save on some of the repetitive coding we'd have to do without that feature. We'll also talk about some downsides of nesting and some things to avoid in going perhaps a little too far in nesting your code. We'll talk about partials quite a bit, how splitting up your CSS code into multiple files, even multiple directories, whether they be frameworks that you import from elsewhere, from other vendors or outside folks who are kind enough to share their work, or even just your own work, whether it be files that pertain just to, say, forms or topography or color, or files that pertain to parts of your site like the header or the footer. Why splitting your code up? The simple fact that Sass allows that can be a great benefit and time saver in your work. We'll talk about how you import those partials effectively and quickly. We'll talk about mixins, a way in which you can write parameterized functions, reusable chunks of code then you can repurpose smartly and thoughtfully in other areas of your work, so you don't have to write the same thing over and over again, adopting that principle of DRY, of not repeating, don't repeat yourself. And we'll talk about, similarly, how inheritance, using the extend keyword in Sass, can let you do similar things. That if you have lots of CSS styled elements that are largely the same, maybe pulling out the same pieces and organizing them into one sort of reusable chunk can make a lot of sense. And then we'll certainly talk about operators, how one can add and subtract things. We'll talk about how using an external library like Bourbon that somebody's already written can make it easier to get a jump start on your project. We'll talk about how Sass both incorporates into and makes it easier to use frameworks like Foundation, the responsive, easy to write pages for mobile or tablet or desktop, how we can use Sass to leverage some of the power of Foundation. We'll touch on how we can use Sass with WordPress, the popular content management system, and how Sass is baked right into Ruby on Rails, the popular web development framework. So Sass is a great time saver. It's not a panacea. It's not a silver bullet. I think one can use Sass poorly, but it does offer some techniques, some features. If you use them with a little bit of thought and a little bit of planning, can really help your CSS development. So let's get going.